Welcome to the Nailsin ratings. So, Star Trek Discovery has posted 3 episodes, and I thought I'd wait to review the series so far at this point after the 3rd episode, because as the producers have said, the 3rd episode is the actual pilot of the series. Because, after all, the Starship Discovery, the show that it's named for, doesn't appear until the 3rd episode. They probably should have named it Star Trek Michael after the star character. But anyway, when the promos and the trailers for the series came out, I was not crazy about it, as it appeared to be a huge departure from the Star Trek universe continuity. The producers claimed the series is set in the prime timeline, the world where Shatner and the gang were, but it doesn't resemble that at all, because they claim it takes place 10 years before the Days of Kirk. But the problem is the original series shows you what Starfleet looked like in style, design, uniforms, etc., and Discovery doesn't even try to match it. So you had to hope that there was some explanation in the show as to why, right? Did you get that? No, you didn't. No, so far there's no explanation as to why it looks the way it does. The Klingons don't look like any version of the Klingons that we've seen so far. Does the show explain that? No, it doesn't. The plot involves a particular hyper-religious sect of the Klingons that could have led to the idea that they are different versions of Klingons, like there's all shapes and sizes and all that. But again, the show does not state this or even try to explain it. There's a scene in which the cult leader of this sect of Klingons meets with the leaders of the different ruling houses of the Klingon Empire. And leading up to it, I thought, well, hey, they're probably going to show some cameos of classic Klingons to make the point. There's different shapes and sizes of Klingons. No, they didn't do that. The leaders of the other houses just look like the cult Klingons. So no, so forget about that. They missed that one too. According to the plot, the Klingon Empire is in a state of division, and I'd seen some rumors online that the reason why might refer to the plot from Star Trek Enterprise, where the Klingons had stolen the eugenics program system or what have you that had created Khan and his group of supermen and that sort of thing. And as a result of this, those Klingons lost their distinctive foreheads and they looked human. Now, this was a clever means of explaining why the Klingons in the original series looked human rather than what the later versions of them looked. Now, of course, they just didn't have the money for the makeup back then, but nevertheless, to make it fit with the continuity of the show, they make this effort, and that was very clever. Probably one of the best storylines out of that series, which was largely a failed one. But that was pretty cool. So you could think that, these eugenically enhanced human-looking Klingons might cause a problem with relationships within the Empire, and that this could be the point of departure for the series as to why the Empire is in disarray. No, they don't mention that. At least not yet. Maybe they will, but it's not in these the opening, which you would think that's when you would. That's the reasons why the Empire is in the state it's in. But no, they didn't do that. The Starship Discovery, I think in my previous videos I theorized, well, maybe there's some sort of black ops type group, and it turns out that's true. But that's not the explanation of why the look of uniforms and everything of Starfleet, because that's the uniform of Starfleet. Everybody in Starfleet wears those blue uniforms. So that's not what it is. No explanation for why it's that departure from continuity. Sarek is in the show, and he's presented as the star character is Michael Burnham. That's Sonequa Martin's character. And Sarek is apparently her adoptive father, because her parents died and Sarek saved her and he ended up raising her. I guess because Sarek just couldn't find time to get a spaceship to take her back to Earth. But anyway, he raises her. And there was an online rumor that Sarek was going to be behind some sort of incident that caused a time warp that would explain the changes in continuity. This is nowhere in the show. It's possible this will happen later, but even if it does, it'll only prove the producers were lying about this show taking place in the original timeline. As, you know, any time warping would mean they created yet another alternate timeline universe. So, now Sarek is in the series as an obvious link to the established Trek lore, but as Michael's adoptive father, this is yet another major deviation from Star Trek continuity, because there's no mention of Spock having had an adopted human sister. Of course, you could chalk this up that Vulcans rarely discuss their personal lives, and that goes a little ways, but then again, Amanda, Spock's human mother, never mentions this. You think she would. But then again, they did introduce that Spock had a brother named Sybok, and he was never mentioned until Star Trek V, which is one of the Star Trek movies most people just want to forget. But it's still, this appears as another element of the total disregard for Trek lore that this show's production has, for whatever reason. And another detail about Michael Burnham having this Vulcan past is that she uses the Vulcan nerve pinch. Now, the problem with that is as far as I know, that the humans can't do that. Vulcans have the ability for the mind meld, which they achieve by touching you, and they can, you know, merge with your mind and read it and all that. And it's apparently that they have some sort of special energy, I guess, within them that enables them to do this. And so that would apply to their ability to use the nerve pinch as well. The only reference to the possibility of humans being able to do it was a throwaway line in one of the shows where I think Kirk says, "Boy, I wish you could teach me how to do that, Spock." And he says, "Well, I've tried." And so that's about the only one I can think of. But when you go to the search for Spock, where Dr. McCoy had Spock's Contra in him, basically Spock's mind and soul and all that, McCoy attempts to use the nerve pinch, and it doesn't work. Now, why not? He had Spock's mind literally inside him, so he would know exactly how to do it. Obviously, the problem was he had human fingers. It didn't work. The same is true here with Michael Burnham. Now, there's a scene of her using Vulcan martial arts. That's a little different. It's moves and tactics and whatnot. That's fine. But the nerve pinch, I don't think so. The producers claimed they'd hired a team of researchers who were there to police the continuity so they didn't deviate from it. Well, it looks like they've done a sloppy job, or they were just ignored entirely. So, yeah. So, all the concerns I had in my original video came true. It's just a complete deviation and no real explanation as to why from the look and style of Star Trek. So even with all those mistakes, is it a good show on its own? Not really. Burnham is said to be the best officer in the fleet, while also being depicted as an incompetent moron with a possible psychosis. After one disagreement with her captain, whom she has this very emotional relationship with, and it's kind of suggested possibly a romantic one, I'm not sure. Spoiler, the captain dies in the second episode. But nevertheless, she immediately turns on her and mutinies against her over the disagreement about how to confront the Klingons. And ultimately this mutiny was all for nothing. The idea was that you had to shoot first to gain their respect, and then somehow that was going to stop the whole Klingon plot. No, that's a bit absurd. That wasn't going to work. So it was a bit much for her to go that far to try to implement her ideas. And it was all for nothing. The battle breaks out, and for the most part, the Starfleet loses the battle. So I don't know that. I think if they had shot first, the cult Klingons just would have destroyed the Shinzu, and that would have been that. So after all that, so of course she's court-martialed for the mutiny, which of course makes sense. But then they sentence her to life. I don't know that you would get a life sentence over that, especially when, due to the circumstances at the time. Probably would have been argued in her favor, but they sentenced her to life, and also she's blamed for starting the war. She didn't. The Klingons did. So, pretty sloppy work there, plot-wise. So, the third episode, we finally get the show started. The captain of the Discovery manipulates her onto his ship, but the reason why is pretty flimsy. Again, the show is telling you that Burnham is amazing, but it doesn't really demonstrate why. I mean, they constantly have her in these superhero poses, and they make the rest of the crew look incompetent, which is a bad idea because, I mean, if the crew is this bad, they're not going to last 30 minutes, let alone a series, because how do they stay alive? As for her Vulcan science skills, as the reason why Lorca, the captain of Discovery, wants her on there, why didn't he just get a real Vulcan? Now, there's no Vulcans in Starfleet yet at this time, so I guess you can say this is the one continuity detail that they're sticking to, but it's also established that the Vulcans and Earth have had this relationship, and so a Vulcan consultant, per se, would not be a stretch to be on the ship, helping them out. What's good to say? Well, the most impressive part of the show, of course, are the special effects. They're the most amazing effects for a sci-fi TV show ever. They really are spectacular. Unfortunately, there's also a problem here. The technology within the series is too far removed from the timeline it claims to be in. One of the best examples here was the use of holograms. In the past, when Starfleet would talk to each other over great distances, they would just talk to each other on monitors. The Admiral would tell Kirk, you got to do this, or Picard, you got to go here, blah, blah, blah. But here, it's all in these full-bodied holograms that appear on the ship. And I suspect somebody at CBS saw The Force Awakens and thought, Snoke looked really cool in that hologram scene. So, so now Star Trek does holograms. Yeah. Oh, boy. And speaking of Star Wars and other sci-fi properties to borrow from, I've heard it mentioned elsewhere, I think Midnight's Edge, something like that. And I agree with it that the show looked a lot like Dune, especially the Klingons. And, well, guess what? The third episode reveals that Discovery's secret mission involves experimenting with some sort of, spores that greatly enhance a starship's ability to fly through space. This is somewhat similar to the spice from Dune. They don't get high on it, but spice was the ability that they used to travel the great distances between stars. And so it looks like they're going to use this in Star Trek. So it's just another element that seems to indicate that the people behind this show wanted to produce some other property. But Trek was all they had. Plus, the brand name has a higher draw. So, yeah, well... yeah. Now, the characters in the show are all pretty flat and boring, with the exception of Doug Jones's character, and of course he has the advantage of being behind all that makeup. And in order to make Burnham seem impressive, they make the rest of the crew look like crap, and they've given her a cookie cutter nerdy type character sidekick. So that she can always, kiss her ass and say, wow, you're amazing. Now, the actress played it, the character, the way it's handled and whatnot, there's potential there for her to grow and get better given time, but I don't know that this series is going to make it to another season. There's a character who portrays pretty basic gay stereotypes that I think some gay people might find insulting. Might not be the reaction they were hoping for, but boy, yeah, That's certainly there. Captain Lorca, the captain of the Starship Discovery, is supposed to be this mysterious figure that could draw you in. And what's going on? Well, it's pretty obvious. He's the villain of the show. I think Michael Burnham is probably going to have to do yet another mutiny at some point against this guy. Again, from Midnight's Edge, I think they discussed it was a pretty good idea on their part that Lorca is basically a copy of the Peter Weller character from Star Trek Into Darkness, where he was, not the main villain, Khan was, but he was, the villain behind the scenes. And that's pretty much what you probably have here. Of course, another really bad idea on the production of this show to look to inspiration from Into Darkness, one of the worst Star Trek movies ever made. So, let's hope not, huh? But it pretty much looks like it. The most irritating aspect of this show, in the face of criticism, is that it utilizes the Ghostbusters means of shielding itself. Basically, if you don't like the show, you're a racist or a misogynist, etc., etc. Nothing about this show is actually groundbreaking in race or sex. Because to suggest the Trek audience is rejecting the show for bigoted reasons, it's just absurd. Because, I gotta ask, has anyone involved with this show ever watched Star Trek? They've been knocking down barriers and whatnot concerning race and sex and all that for decades. And the audience that loves that show is not the type of people that are going to have some major issue. So the idea that the lead is a black female has nothing to do with criticisms of the show. So it's pretty pathetic for the producers to go that route in order to defend their show, to cover up the fact that they dropped the ball and you're pretty lazy in the production of this thing. In this vein, I suppose, the latest trend from Hollywood is, of course, to let Trump ruin your show. And there's a lot of, because everybody's fighting some version of Trump or not. I suspect Supergirl will be fighting Trump. Pretty soon, the Marvel movies will probably have Thanos wearing a blonde wig, and all of that. And Trek's no different. The producers have said that the Klingons are based on Trump supporters. Yes, they want to make Kronos great again. In actuality, I think they're slapping this on after the fact because it doesn't really appear that way on the screen. There's some kind of cult. So, but, I guess the idea of a hyper-religious cult plunging the world into war is just something that isn't happening in our world today. So what else could they refer to, There's just nothing out there happening right now that could fall into that pattern. If these guys would have spent more time on plot and continuity instead of trying to make a political commercial, they might have had something. Because it's a shame, because it's all a missed opportunity. The look alone should have been a no-brainer. But there's been some talk that due to the split between CBS and Paramount after, the dissolving of Viacom, the shows have to look different from the movies or some such. But I don't know. It seems CBS would look more like the TV series. I don't understand that. They contracted Bad Robot to do it, and they're contracted with Paramount. I know that's just. Seems like CBS could just rule, go ahead and make like the show, we own it. But I don't know. They should have just said it in a future timeline, because then the sky's the limit and make it look like anything you want. But at this point, I have to conclude that Star Trek is just in the hands of people who don't really like Star Trek. They like, Dune and Star Wars or something, but not Star Trek. But someone who loves Star Trek is, of course, Seth MacFarlane. His show, The Orville, is presented as a Star Trek parody, but it isn't. It's flat out Star Trek. Now, McFarlane has long been vocal about his desire to produce a Star Trek series, but he just never got the shot. The Orville is basically Star Trek with jokes tapped onto it in order to avoid being sued. Because, with parody, you're allowed to stretch the legal boundaries by which you can copy a certain property. And that's what they've done here. But now, the first episode I didn't care for. It was rather flat, and it wasn't funny. And I was probably like, well, maybe I should bail, but went ahead and watched the second episode. That one was very good and was funny. And the rest of the shows after that are really showing some potential here. Initially, I thought the best thing going for the Orville was Star Trek Discovery. But I think the show is proving that it can stand on its own. It's basically an homage to Star Trek The Next Generation, but it works with that. Some of the plots and stuff seem similar to that. I even noticed, interestingly enough, it of course pays homage to the Star Trek The Motion Picture, in that the music for the episode, I'm blanking on the name of it, the one with the giant spaceship that had this community living in it and didn't realize they were on a spaceship. Anyway, while they're exploring that ship, you can hear the music is very similar to the music used by Jerry Goldsmith in the motion picture. And I can't help but think that that's a deliberate nod to it. So obviously these are fans of Star Trek making this show who actually love Star Trek. So yeah, it works with all that. Now, the effects are nowhere near the quality of Star Trek Discovery. So what? It doesn't matter, because the stories and plots and charm, and of course the uniforms look like Star Trek, more than make up for any deficit in special effects. So I think this show has potential to carry on, whereas Discovery doesn't. There's just no life in it. Yeah, if you want to see a new Star Trek series on television right now, your best bet is the Orville. Yeah, there you go. So, no stars for Star Trek Discovery, and 4 out of 5 stars for the Orville. Yeah, so thanks for listening and watching. And do check out my podcast at radiomisfits.com. It is the Mr. Nailsin Show. Nailsin. Yes, it's just that simple. And in the description below, check out the links for my stores, where t-shirts and mugs and stuff, and also a store where you can get my Poor Man Mystery Science Theater treatment of public domain movies. So check those out. It would be greatly appreciated. And